Chapter 60 Eavesdropping. When Mrs. Yarrow arrived at the outer courtyard, she saw Mrs. Sun enter Gu Chenx's room and quietly followed her. Just as she walked to the window, she heard Mrs. Sun ask, "Sun, do you know what kind of business your third brother has been doing recently? Did my father ask you to come and ask?" Gu Chengxi raised his head and asked in surprise. "It is me who wanted to ask. Most of them have their own income, and we are the only ones who can't even earn a copper coin. I even have to depend on the madam's mood to get money for some needles and threads. These days are getting hard on us." Mrs. Sun sighed. She knew this wasn't a good move, but she had no other choice. In the past, she still had some monthly allowance for living. But her monthly salary had stopped since they came back here, but she still had to buy the daily necessities. If she didn't want to depend on Mrs. Yarrow's charity, she had to think of a way herself. Gu Chengxi did not immediately reply to her because he knew that Mrs. Sun was loyal to his father. If he told her now, his father would learn in 2 days. Once his father found out, the entire Gu family would know about it too. He would be ungrateful and would be harming his third brother if he exposed their secrets. On the other hand, Mrs. Yarrow could not hear the answer she wanted from Gu Chengxi and thought that he had deliberately lowered his voice. She immediately straightened her body and leaned toward the window. She didn't expect to meet a lizard, and it might have felt threatened as it immediately raised its head, ready to attack. Mrs. Yarrow was so frightened that she screamed and took several steps back. Although she quickly covered her mouth, the mother and son in the room still heard her. The mother and son looked at each other and rushed out, and they happened to see Mrs. Yarrow's back as she ran away in a sorry state. Mrs. Sun couldn't help but clench her fists. How despicable, actually eavesdropping on us. Gu Chengxi pulled her back into the house and said, "There really isn't any secret to speak of when we live in the same courtyard. As for the money, if you don't want to depend on Mrs. Yarrow's mood, you can ask father. You can ask her before father, too. If it really can't be done, when I learned some tricks from Brother Tian, I can catch prey and exchange them for money, and I will give them to you." He didn't say that he had recently learned to recognize some medicinal herbs from Chengruo and the others, but he didn't want to tell her. It was also to leave a way out for them in case anything happened. "You're still young, so you're not allowed to go up the mountain to hunt. As for money, your mother will think of a way, so you don't need to worry." Mrs. Sun's nose couldn't help but sting after hearing this as she turned around and left. After she had walked far away, Gu Chengye, who lived next door, walked out. He looked at Gu Chengx's room thoughtfully before finally retreating into his room. On the other hand, after Mrs. Yarrow returned to her room, second Uncle Gu was already snoring. She angrily pushed him before turning off the lights and lying down. However, she tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. She kept thinking of how Gu Chengruo and his wife were earning money, and her heart felt like it was on fire, burning her with anxiousness. The point was that Shed had enough of living a frugal life. Even if she couldn't go back to her previous life of luxury, at least she didn't have to be so conservative about her meals. However, when she thought of Gu Chengruo's medical skills and her husband's instructions, she knew she could not go against the couple. Otherwise, if they fell out, they would be the ones to suffer. It seemed that she could only urge Mrs. Liu to do something. After all, Mrs. Liu's situation was direr than hers. Chapter 61 Conspiracy. The following day, after eating breakfast, Mrs. Yarrow put on the silver hairpin she had just bought a few days ago and went out to find Mrs. Liu, who was drying the blankets in the courtyard. She bobbed her head and said, "Sister-in-law, do you think my silver hairpin looks good?" Mrs. Liu glanced at it and said, "I was the one who picked it for you. Why are you still asking me that?" Then, she patted the blanket. "Look at my memory. How could I have forgotten about this?" Mrs. Yarrow said annoyedly, but it quickly turned into a face of showing off. After Mrs. Liu noticed something was wrong, she turned her head to look at her and just happened to see her showing off. Her face suddenly sank, but she no longer paid attention to her and pretended not to see it, busy with the work in her hands. She thought, "Isn't it just a silver hairpin? What's there to show off? In the past, it was something that I bestowed on my servants." But when she thought of the wooden hairpin on her head, she was really envious. However, she had to save money for her children's wedding, so she didn't dare squander it. She wanted to give Mrs. Yarrow a kick when she thought of this. When Mrs. Yarrow saw Mrs. Liu's dark face, she knew that Mrs. Liu's heart was unhappy and that she had poked at her sore spot. She was overjoyed. After all, their second family branch had finally suppressed the first branch. "Sister-in-law, do you really want to live your life like this?" Mrs. Yarrow asked. Mrs. Liu was stunned for a moment and turned her head to look at her vigilantly. "What do you want to do? What else can I do? We all know how much money our family earns every month. I'm afraid we don't even have enough money to buy food at the end of the month, let alone other things. If we want to live a good life, we have to find a way to earn more money. I remember that little sis-in-law likes to enjoy white mushroom soup, but you don't even have the money to enjoy it even once since we came back," Mrs. Yarrow said with a smile. After Mrs. Liu heard it, she finally understood what she meant. Mrs. Yarrow was goading her to find Jiyu Chungrui and his wife to find ways to earn money. However, she was not stupid. Through her son's analysis, she knew Jiyu Chungrui was no longer a stubborn donkey with no one to rely on. She couldn't do much. "From what you're saying, do you have a good idea? Doesn't Chungrui already have one? Chungrui is different now, and I don't want to make a joke of myself in the village. If you want to go, you can go by yourself. I'm not going." When Mrs. Yarrow heard this, she was shocked. Before, Mrs. Liu had almost taken the lives of the young couple. Why had she suddenly changed her tone now? Was it also because of Jiyu Chengrui's medical skills? However, even if she changed now, the couple might not necessarily forgive what she had done in the past. Even though she looked down on Mrs. Liu, Mrs. Yarrow still had to make use of her. Otherwise, how would she get her cakes, beef, and mutton? Suddenly, the sound of a hen laying eggs could be heard. She immediately turned her head and looked at the next door unhappily. "I heard that sixth aunt would go to the haystack at the village entrance every day to make shoes and bask in the sun." After Mrs. Liu heard it, she paused for a moment. She quickly understood what Mrs. Yarrow meant, that they could ask someone else. "Do you know how to make shoes?" Mrs. Liu asked. Who would? Mrs. Yarrow understood the meaning of her words halfway through, and the two went to Mrs. Huang's room. Each of them found a shoe that had not been completed, took a needle and thread, and left. However, they didn't go there directly. Instead, they waited until sixth aunt had left and went to her house for confirmation. Only after that did they go to the village entrance after her. Chapter 62 Sewing shoes. The women sitting on the straw piles at the village entrance and basking in the sun were all shocked to see the two coming over. Then, the lively atmosphere immediately cooled down. Sixth Aunt Jiyu saw the shoes in their hands and oiled her needle slightly. Then, she looked at the shoe sole in her hands, found the proper position, and stabbed it hard. At the same time, she asked curiously with a bit of contempt, "Oh, aren't you the two noble ladies of the third and seventh son? Why are you also making shoes like us country bumpkins? How rare. Oh, look at what you are saying. Now that we have the same identity, we naturally have to do as the Romans do." Mrs. Yarrow smiled as she stepped forward. "Yes, we're learning how to make shoes. This is our first time, and we're afraid of ruining something. This is why we're asking for your advice." Mrs. Liu echoed. "Ask for guidance. Mrs. Huang from your family is good at it. Why do you need to ask us for guidance?" The sixth aunt of the Jiyu family pouted. "That's right. I heard your family's concubine can even get work from the shop in town. If so, do you still need to ask us for help?" A woman said sourly. "Mrs. Huang knows some embroidery and sewing, but she has never done shoe soles. This is why we can only come and ask for your advice." When Mrs. Yarrow said this, she turned her head and said with a smile, "Sixth aunt, I heard that the soles you make are the strongest in the village. Can you teach us?" Sixth aunt heard her craftsmanship being praised and felt happy. She immediately moved her seat and said humbly, "I can't say I sew the sturdiest shoes, but I do add one or two more elements to them. If you want to learn, I'll teach you." "Okay, thank you, sixth aunt." Mrs. Yarrow responded by sitting down next to her. Mrs. Liu hesitated and finally sat on a stone on the side. The crowd smiled when they saw this, But no one reminded her that sitting on a rock at this time of the day was just asking for trouble. Sure enough, as soon as Mrs. Liu sat down, she felt a bone-piercing cold under her butt and immediately stood up. In the end, she sat on the straw pile with a look of disgust. Sixth aunt rolled her eyes at her but still stopped what she was doing and taught them how to sew the soles of their shoes. After she had taught them how to sew, she continued to sew her own. By the way, third sister-in-law, did you guys know that Jiyu Chungrui and his wife bought a donkey? She asked curiously. In fact, she was gloating about it as they should be regretting their decision now. The young couple's lives had gotten better after they left, but their old family was in nothing but chaos. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it in person. Have you seen it? Mrs. Liu replied as she struggled to adjust the soles of her shoes. Yes, I saw him this morning when I came out to dispose of some waste. That donkey is sure fat and strong. Then it's true. It's good that they can live well. We can rest assured. Sixth aunt gave her a disdainful look and didn't say anything else. Seeing this, Mrs. Yarrow was somewhat anxious. Since they knew that Chengru's family had become rich, why didn't anyone ask how they had become rich? When had the villagers become so generous? However, she didn't ask any further. Instead, she carefully sews the soles of her shoes. She was learning how to make it for her grandson, as she didn't dare let others do it. It would be troublesome if anyone did something terrible. Seeing this, Mrs. Liu did not say anything. Since Jiyu Chungrui had to pass through here to return to the village, she would bring up the topic again when the time came. A few more old ladies came in one after another. Because of their dazed silence, the others began to gossip again. However, the gossip voices were low, but some people were even pointing at them. After all, they still remembered how the Jiyu family had chased Jiyu Chungrui and his wife to live in Mother God's temple. Chapter 63 New ingredients. Of course, some people didn't like Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow. Seeing that they stayed, they immediately got up and left. Jiyu Chungrui did not know someone was waiting for him at the village entrance. After he entered Hongyun restaurant and unloaded the bean sprouts and tofu, he opened a bamboo basket and said, "Uncle Ju, do you want to take these?" Chef Ju looked inside the basket. There were 2 yellow objects, one black, and one red. He asked, "What are these things?" He picked up a piece of braised tofu and asked, "Why does this look like tofu?" Jiyu Chungrui was secretly happy. "You have good eyes. This is braised dried tofu. Try it." Jiyu Chungrui didn't expect that there would be tofu here, but no other tofu byproducts. It seemed that this tofu business of theirs could continue. After Chef Ju heard that, he put it under his nose and sniffed it carefully. He didn't expect the lovely fragrance from it. Then, he broke off a piece and put it in his mouth. He was surprised that the more he chewed, the more fragrant it was. It was much more flavorful than the regular stir-fried tofu. He nodded and said, "If we were to take it, how much would you sell it for?" "To tell you the truth, this is something that my wife made. You are the expert, so why don't you offer me a price? I can't make the decision myself, as I need Manager Liu's permission." After Chef Ju finished speaking, he asked the waiter at the side to call for the manager. He looked at the other 2 items curiously and asked, "Are these 2 also bean products?" "Yes, this is tofu skin, and this is dried yuba. You can stir-fry them, mix them with food, or stew them. However, the yuba are dried, so you must soak them in warm water before cooking them." Chef Ju nodded and looked at each of them carefully. Then, he began to think about how to cook them. If he could come up with 1 or 2 new dishes, he would be able to have an excellent new year. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. When Manager Liu came down, he saw Chef Ju standing at the side in a daze. He went up and gave him a push. "What are you thinking about? You're here. Mr. Jiyu and his wife have sent 2 new ingredients, and I'm thinking about what to do with them." Chef Ju said this after he came back to his senses. "Oh." Manager Liu looked at the items in the bamboo basket curiously and asked, "Are they all made of soybeans?" "Yes," Jiyu Chungrui nodded, then briefly explained their methods. Manager Liu also tried a piece of braised tofu and nodded. "Not bad. This tofu tastes similar to meat. However, Our restaurant doesn't accept half-seasoned products, so we will accept them only if you produce them in their original flavor. As for the price, how about 8 coppers per pound? The braised dried tofu and tofu skin can be sold at 8 coppers, but dried yuba must be 20 coppers per pound. 20 coppers per pound. Isn't that too expensive? To put it bluntly, 3 pounds of soybeans could only produce almost 1 pound of dried yuba. With the addition of firewood needed, we will only earn our labor. If it were another person, we would sell it to them for at least 25 coppers per pound. Manager Liu picked up the dried yuba and looked at it carefully under the sun. It was very fine and dry, and it could be transported over long distances, being able to be stored for a long time. It was indeed a rare good food item. Then, he remembered that a pound of soybeans sold for 5 coppers in the grain store, so he hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, we'll accept your prices. I will take these for now, and we'll decide how much we want tomorrow. All right. As for the braised tofu, you guys can keep it for drinking snacks. After Jiyu Chungrui finished speaking, he moved the ingredients into the kitchen, received his payment, went to buy some medicinal herbs, and rushed back. Chapter 64 Blocked. After Jiyu Chungrui left, Manager Liu looked at Chef Ju and said, "I'll have to trouble you to work hard today and study these 3 things thoroughly. With these few things, we can let those who don't like to eat meat have a taste of meat. Don't worry, I'll start now." After Chef Ju was done speaking, he took a piece of braised dried tofu and chewed it slowly, trying to find out what spices had been added to make it so delicious. Mrs. Yarrow saw Jiyu Chungrui driving the donkey cart at the village entrance. She immediately stood up and said, "Chungrui, did your family really buy a donkey?" "Yes, Auntie. Nice to see you basking in the sun." Jiyu Chungrui replied politely and drove the cart forward. Why did you buy 3 broken water tanks?" After Mrs. Yarrow saw the hole at the bottom of the water tank, she asked curiously. At the same time, one of her hands tightly grabbed the side of the carriage. Jiyu Chungrui looked at her intensely. He understood what she implied without her asking. This was because Jiyu Chengshi had made a special trip to his house before he left in the morning. Jiyu Chengshi told him their family had been eyeing Jiyu Chengrui's wealth source. However, he had not expected them to act in full view of everyone. What did he buy? Chungrui brings a water tank in and out every day. Don't you know that? At this time, 6th Aunt stood up and walked over. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Mrs. Yarrow's hand holding the carriage's side. She knew what was going on now. How else would these 2 ladies suddenly want to learn how to sew shoes from her? It turned out that was a lie, and what they really wanted was to stop Jiyu Chungrui. However, she was also quite curious about what kind of business they were doing, so she asked, "Chungrui, what are you doing here every morning?" "I'm just sending some bean sprouts to Hongyun restaurant and stocking up on some medicinal herbs." Jiyu Chungrui replied. "Bean sprouts? What are bean sprouts?" Hearing this, 6th Aunt Jiyu became even more curious. She had never heard of bean sprouts before. "Chungrui, are you referring to the new bean sprouts dish from Hongyun restaurant? I heard their vinegar-fried bean sprouts are crunchy and refreshing, with a hint of spiciness. They are very delicious." At that moment, a woman spoke up. "Now that you mention it, I heard of that too. 2 days ago, when I was at the market, I heard there was a new bean sprout dish that was delicious, and I had to line up in advance. Any later, and it will be gone. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site." "Thanks, is that true? We have to line up to enjoy a dish. I've only heard of it, but I've never eaten it before." "Chungrui, the bean sprout you're talking about, is it the same dish they're talking about?" 6th Aunt asked Jiyu Chungrui. "Yes, but it's just a vegetarian dish. There's a lack of vegetables in winter, so that's why everyone else is interested in it for now." Jiyu Chungrui replied. "That's already very impressive. We've lived our entire lives without even thinking about it. Thanks for the praise. We'll treat you to some bean sprouts when you come over." Sure, I'll go when I'm free." 6th Aunt Jiyu smiled and nodded. "Chungrui, I heard that these vegetables are quite expensive. Can you teach us how to grow them? We can also earn some money to celebrate the new year." Yes, yes. It's such a good way to get rich. You shouldn't keep quiet about it. That's right. We've been affected by your family one way or another. You can't just keep it to yourselves. Sixth Aunt Gu felt guilty when she realized they were going too far. She wouldn't have been curious if she had known this would happen. She waved her hand and said, all right, all right. Are you trying to rob him or something? That's right. These people have been affected, so why don't you mention the benefits you got from it? Mrs. Liu said indignantly. Chapter 65 Can't hide anymore. You should stop speaking too. When Sixth Aunt Gu heard this, she looked at Mrs. Liu in a bad mood. She was obviously fanning the flames, and she would be the one who suffered if they got into an argument. Then, she glared at Mrs. Yarrow and pushed the donkey cart. Chungrue, you should go home. Thank you, Sixth Aunt. Gu Chungrue thanked her, then turned around and drove the cart home. However, he also knew that they could no longer hide the matter of the bean sprouts. It seemed that he had to go back and discuss countermeasures. On the other hand, Sixth Aunt Gu saw that the crowd still wanted to ask more questions, so she roared again, all right, all of you, shut up. Growing bean sprouts is their family's specialty. If you want to learn, go to their door with sincere requests. Besides, when they were chased out, who among you helped them? Now here you are, demanding the recipe for growing bean sprouts. You all sure have the nerve to ask for it. Sixth Aunt, what do you mean chased out of the house? We separated in peace. Mrs. Liu said at this time. We're neighbors. Do you really think him deaf? Sixth Aunt Gu snorted coldly and walked into the middle of their bickering. She directly pushed them aside and rushed to the patriarch's house. She had caused such big trouble, so no matter what, she had to let the patriarch know. Otherwise, it would be ugly if things got out of hand. When Mrs. Yarrow and Mrs. Liu saw this, they wanted to chase after her and stop her, but when they saw the direction she was heading, they looked at each other and immediately went home. As for the others, after looking at each other for a moment, they immediately dispersed and returned to their respective homes. On the other hand, Ju Ying, drying yuba in the courtyard, saw Jiyu Chungrue return and asked, Rui, how is it? Did you sell the tofu? After speaking, she hung the yuba in her hand to dry and went forward to help him unload the cart. They have accepted it, but he'll have to wait until tomorrow to know how much they want. Oh right, about the dried tofu. They said they only wanted the original flavor, not the braised variety. Right, they have a chef. It will increase the cost if they buy half-seasoned products. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. Well, no matter what, it's fine as long as it can be sold. After Jiyu Chungrue briefed her about the restaurant matters, he told her about the incident at the village entrance. I'm afraid we can't hide the bean sprouts anymore. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think? Ju Ying asked. Then, she looked at the donkey, who was sniffling and leisurely eating the withered grass by the shed. It seemed that it was all because of the donkey. But it was only a matter of time. Even if she knew it would turn out like this, she would still buy him for convenience. We'll only teach them and not involve ourselves in anything else. What do you think? Jiyu Chungrue replied after a moment of hesitation. That's exactly what I think as well. Also, let's make it clear. After teaching them, we don't care if they can sell them or not. All right, then it's decided. After Jiyu Chungrue finished speaking, he tied the donkey and put the cart to the side. Finally, he carried a large bag of medicinal herbs and walked into the house. Ju Ying went back to the house to pick out the tofu skin. On the other hand, when Sixth Aunt Jiyu arrived at the patriarch's house, only Mrs. Wang was at home making their children's clothes. When she saw her coming in, she paused and asked curiously, Sixth Aunt, why are you here? Aren't you supposed to be at the village entrance chatting? Then, she lowered her head and continued sewing her clothes. Sister-in-law, don't mention this anymore. It's precisely my chatting that's caused trouble. Sixth Aunt Jiyu said as she sat on the brick bed with a peeved expression. Trouble? What trouble? Mrs. Wang stopped what she was doing and asked. Sixth Aunt Jiyu did not hide anything and told her about what happened at the village entrance. The third and seventh son's wives are really horrid. They didn't act as Chengruis elders at all. It seems like they have used me. Chapter 66 Spreading the news they definitely used you. Otherwise, why would the two of them, who have always disliked us, take the initiative to find us? Two shameless women, you just watch how I deal with them in the future. You should stay away from them. No matter what, thieves crawled their way out of the capital. In terms of schemes and means, were not their match. Hearing her words, sixth Aunt Jiyu felt indignant, but she calmed down. Then, she asked, Sister-in-law, now everyone in the village knows about Jiyu Chungrui and his wife selling sprouts. What should we do? Should we tell Big Brother? It's almost noon. I'll let your brother know when he's back. Mrs. Wang paused for a moment and said in a bad mood, You too, in the future, you should keep your mouth shut, or else everything will be ruined by your blabbering. I know, sister-in-law. I'll go back now. Sixth Aunt Jiyu stood up and left. Mrs. Wang looked at her back and shook her head, but she was also a little curious about Jiyu Chengruis bin sprouts. On the other hand, the women on good terms with Mrs. Bai immediately went to her house to report after dispersing from the village entrance. Therefore, by noon, when the village chief and patriarch knew about this, they couldn't even enjoy eating lunch. The people from the two clans, especially those who had financial difficulties, came to visit. They asked them to go to Jiyu Chengrui's house and see if they could get Jiyu Chungrui to teach them how to grow bin sprouts. In the Jiyu family's old mansion, after lunch, Mrs. Yarrow told the others about Jiyu Chengruis selling bin sprouts. I heard these bin sprouts have been selling well at the Hongyun restaurant in town. I'm sure it won't be cheap. Chungrui and his wife are sure good at scheming. They didn't even tell us about such a good deal. If I had known, Mrs. Chow interrupted her with a dark face. If you knew, what could you have done? You've been bullying them so much, so how could you expect them to tell you anything? Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. After she finished speaking, she fiercely glared at Mrs. Liu. No, mother, didn't you not care before? Mrs. Liu met her resentful eyes and said aggrievedly. She was disgruntled. Everyone clearly didn't object to the separation of their family, so why did they blame her now? Especially the old woman. Don't think she didn't know that this old hag had more silver than any of them. She didn't even help Jiyu Chungrui and his wife back then. According to the changes in her expression, Mrs. Chow knew what she was thinking and suddenly felt short of breath. Finally, she simply picked up her walking stick, hit it on the ground, and then hobbled back to the house. Seeing this, Jiyu Chengshi immediately put down his chopsticks, turned around, and ran out. Seeing this, Mrs. Yarrow said unhappily, What a sponge. Madam, Chengshi is just tired from chopping firewood the entire morning. After Mrs. Sun finished speaking, she lowered her head and silently ate the rice in her bowl. Mrs. Yarrow still wanted to speak, but second Uncle Jiyu directly interrupted her. Enough, what's all the noise? Can you all shut your mouths when eating? Brother, do you want to go out for a walk? When Father Jiyu heard that, he knew what was up. He hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and walked out. Because the family's income was minimal, they could only watch as their wealth decreased if they didn't find something to do. Most importantly, two grown men lazily living off the women at home was not a good impression. Chapter 67 Visit. After they left the house, the two went straight out. When they were outside, second Uncle Jiyu said, Brother, look, let's go and take a look. As long as we don't touch their sales channels, there shouldn't be any problems. Father Jiyu nodded. After he finished speaking, the two of them walked toward the end of the village. However, they were so frightened by Zhuang that they didn't dare go in. Jiyu Chungrui heard the dog barking and walked out. A cold smile flashed in his eyes when he saw the two people standing outside the door. He hesitated for a moment, but still walked over and invited them in. When second Uncle Jiyu saw Yuba being dried in the courtyard, he asked curiously, Chungrui, what are you doing? Bean products. Jiyu Chungrui did not reply after that as he led them into the house. Ju Ying, who was eating dumplings, was shocked when she saw them come in. She really didn't expect them to come to her house shamelessly. But she still got up and brought them 2 stools. "Father," second uncle, "I have some dumplings. I'll make a bowl for each of you." After saying that, she turned around and walked out. "Father," second uncle, "have a cup of water." Ji-yu Chung-rui poured a glass of water for each of them. "You guys seem to be living quite a good life now," second uncle Ji-yu said as he looked at the white dumplings on the table. "I was just lucky," Ji-yu Chung-rui said as he sat in the center seat. When Father Ji-yu heard him say this, he knew that Ji-yu Chung-rui still held a grudge against him for the separation of the family. He immediately turned around and wanted to leave. However, when he thought of all the looks of disdain and ridicule he had received during this period of time, as well as his family's situation, he finally decided to stay. However, his expression was not good. Seeing this, Ji-yu Chung-rui did not provoke him anymore. Instead, he asked, "Did you come here today for the beet sprouts? Come and read on our website Wuxia World site." "Thanks, that's right. I'm not afraid of you laughing at us, but we haven't found a job yet. You know the situation at home. There are a few mouths waiting for food. We can't just sit there and do nothing." Second Uncle Ji-yu said, "Did you know that Mrs. Liu and second aunt blocked me at the village entrance? We only learned about it when we were having dinner, and I understand they are in the wrong. How could they spread this news? They are diluting our source of income." Ji-yu Chung-rui nodded and looked at him, waiting for the verdict. Second Uncle Ji-yu was at a loss for words and had no idea what to say. He could only look at Father Ji-yu. Father Ji-yu only looked at Ji-yu Chung-rui and did not say anything. The 2 of them looked at each other for a while, but neither had the slightest intention of backing down. "How about we get your mother and second aunt to come and apologize to you later?" Second Uncle Ji-yu spoke up right away. "Mrs. Liu." Ji-yu Chung-rui corrected. Second Uncle Ji-yu was stunned for a while before he understood what Ji-yu Chung-rui meant. Ji-yu Chung-rui did not acknowledge Mrs. Liu's position as the first wife. Then, he looked at Father Ji-yu with a weird expression. Seeing this, Father Ji-yu clenched his fists, got up, and walked out. "No, big brother, you," second Uncle Ji-yu immediately chased after him, and the 2 avoided Zhuang. At that time, Ju Ying, hiding in the kitchen, saw they had left and immediately returned to the living room. She saw Ji-yu Chung-rui eating dumplings with his chopsticks and smiled. While eating the dumplings, she sat down and asked, "Rui, what did they say?" Second uncle meant to have Mrs. Liu and second aunt apologize. In the end, because I didn't acknowledge Mrs. Liu's identity as my stepmother, the 2 of them left in anger. No way. When did they become so submissive? It's not that they are submissive, it's just that the old man is too prideful. It's already his limit to lower his pride and come. It'll be interesting to see if he can hold back now that he's being made fun of in front of second uncle. Chapter 68 Purpose. Ju Ying nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Then we'll wait for Mrs. Liu's apology. With Mrs. Liu's character, I doubt she will. Moreover, the old man wouldn't let her come over to apologize to a youngling like me." Ji-yu Chung-rui paused for a moment and said, "Babe, if they dare to make things difficult for you, don't be soft-hearted, or there will be endless trouble in the future. Don't worry, just based on the fact that they owe me 2 lives, I won't be soft-hearted toward them." "That's good. Don't fight with force. If there's anything, let's discuss it. All right, hurry up and eat. Otherwise, these dumplings will turn into a lump." After Ju Ying finished speaking, she continued eating the dumplings. On the other hand, the 2 Ji-yu brothers went out one after another. Second Uncle Ji-yu still wanted to persuade his brother, but Father Ji-yu did not give him a chance. He just rushed home in a rage. "Third brother, what's wrong with you 2? Are you 2 fighting?" The patriarch, who was walking towards them, asked. The village chief, following behind him, chimed in, "That's right. Let's talk it out. We're all family, and no obstacle can't be overcome. Sigh, don't mention it. We went to Chengru's place just now." Second Uncle Ji-yu explained. But before he could finish his words, Father Ji-yu interrupted him. "Stop talking, aren't you ashamed?" After he said that, he greeted the patriarch and the village chief before rushing home. Second Uncle Gu helplessly shook his head at the two of them and followed Father Gu. After they had walked far away, the village chief looked at the patriarch and asked, "Qingji, do they have the same goal as us?" "It should be, but it looks like he struck a nail." The patriarch replied thoughtfully. Otherwise, seventh brother would not have looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. "Then, let's go take a look first. There are conflicts between them, and some things are easier for us to discuss. But of course, we wouldn't let the young couple take the short end of the stick. That's for sure. It's not easy for them either." After that, they walked toward Jiyu Chengrui's house. When they reached the entrance, they shouted and avoided Zhuang as they entered the house. Jiyu Chengrui happened to meet the two at the door. The village chief pointed at the yuba and asked, "Chengrui, what are you guys making? The yellow ones look pretty good." "It's a bean product that Ying made. It's cold outside, Uncle and Grandpa village chief, you should come inside." Jiyu Chengrui let them into the house. The village head looked at the yuba thoughtfully. If the couple had a new source of income, it would be easier for them to ask for the bean sprouts. When Zhu Ying saw them coming in, she naturally knew their purpose. She greeted them and went to the kitchen with their bowls and chopsticks. After washing up, she made a pot of chrysanthemum rock candy tea for them. It just so happened that they were almost done with the small talk, so the patriarch asked, "I think you and your wife more or less know the purpose of our visit today." "I guess. It's about the bean sprouts, right?" Jiyu Chengrui nodded. "Yes, that's why we're here with our thick skin to ask for your opinion." The patriarch nodded. "But, it's not something forced." The village chief added. "As you know, even though our village is better off than the other villages, that's when it's considered as a whole. Nearly half of the families here are still living a bitter life, so it's best to teach them. Of course, even if you did teach them, I wouldn't let you do so for free. You can state any conditions you want. If they accept, then go ahead. If they don't, then it's their own business." Chapter 69 Condition. As soon as the village chief finished speaking, the donkey outside brayed. Jiyu Chengrui and Zhu Ying looked at each other, and Jiyu Chengrui said, "Since they've come to you to ask for a favor, I'm sure they really need a job. We can't just stand by and do nothing. We must say this in advance, we will only teach them. The way they sell, the price drops, and the amount they earn has nothing to do with us. Don't look for us if there's any trouble. That's for sure. That's their own business." The village chief said, surprised. "What do you want in return?" he asked. "How about this? Whoever learns it has to send a strong laborer who can come here and help build a shed for the donkey in the backyard for 2 days. Or providing some clay and wood will do." Jiyu Chengrui replied. The patriarch and the village chief exchanged glances and immediately nodded. "All right, it's settled then. Well, go and tell them." After a few polite words, they drank their cup of tea and left in a hurry. That night, the two elders sent a letter. Everyone who accepted their conditions could start work tomorrow. At the same time, Zhu Ying also promised them that she would teach the people who came how to grow bean sprouts. Of course, the Jiyu family's old mansion had also received the letter, which made Father Jiyu and Second Uncle Jiyu quite angry. If the entire village was learning to grow bean sprouts, how could they still make money? Thinking of this, Second Uncle Jiyu growled, "What an ingrate. He would rather give the village away to make money than us. They've gone too far. No matter what, we're still a family. How can they help an outsider?" Jiyu Changye immediately echoed that indignantly when he heard that. "I told you, there." Just as Mrs. Liu opened her mouth, Father Jiyu glared at her and said, "You shut up." "No, brother." Just as Mrs. Yarrow was about to plead, Father Jiyu glared at her and said, "You shut up too." This, Mrs. Yarrow still wanted to retort but was directly pulled to the side by Second Uncle Jiyu. "Uncle, father, you can only blame Chengrui for this matter. How can you blame aunt and mother?" Jiyu Chengji said indignantly as he supported Mrs. Yarrow, who had almost been pulled down. "Brat, do we look like we can't tell right from wrong? Do you know what your mother and aunt did this morning?" Second Uncle Jiyu slammed the table and said in a bad mood. "What?" After Jiyu Chengji heard this, he looked confused and then looked at Mrs. Yao. When Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow heard this, they immediately retreated to the side with guilty expressions. Suddenly, Mrs. Chiao said in a neutral tone, "Chungrui planting bean sprouts was spread by the two at the village entrance. Otherwise, how would the village know about it? What they are doing is equivalent to cutting off Chengrui's source of income. Do you think that he will teach you now? But Chungrui shouldn't teach everyone else." Mrs. Yarrow said unhappily. If they won't teach them, the entire village will be jealous and find trouble with them. Ultimately, it's all because of your stupid and terrible decisions. Mrs. Chiao rolled her eyes at her. "It's time for you to face reality," she continued. "This is Shanghai village, not the capital. Without the royal merchant's title, and no one respecting you on behalf of the princess, no one will care about you. Indeed, it's already good enough that they didn't bully us." Second Uncle Jiyu paused for a moment before he continued, "Actually, Chungrui didn't say that he wouldn't teach us. He just wants sister-in-law and your mother to apologize to her." "An apology? Can he bear taking my apology? Isn't he afraid of shortening his lifespan?" Mrs. Liu immediately shouted angrily. Chapter 70. Rare guest. Father Jiyu sneered and immediately turned to leave. Jiyu Changye saw that his father was about to give up and quickly chased after him. "Father, why don't I apologize to Chungrui on behalf of my mother and second aunt?" "It's too late. Forget it." Father Jiyu shook his head and turned to walk into Mrs. Guo's room. Jiyu Changye immediately reached out to stop him and said, "Father, I don't think it's too late. The whole village is growing bean sprouts, so it might be an opportunity for us." "An opportunity?" Father Jiyu paused for a moment, but his eyes immediately lit up. "You mean to sell the sprouts?" "Yes, think about it. If the villagers sell them alone, they won't find a good market. They can only peddle in towns or nearby villages because of the cold. They can't sell for any good price at all. But if we organize ourselves and use the oil mill's ships and channels to ship it out, it'll be different." Although Father Jiyu disagreed with using the oil mill ships to sell goods, he had to admit it was a good idea. At that moment, he thought of someone he had once helped. It seemed that it was time for him to go over and take a look. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to develop on this small piece of land with the Chiao family suppressing him. "Then you can make a trip there when you have the time," he said. "But if it doesn't work out, don't make it too awkward." Jiyu Chengye's expression froze for a moment before he nodded and said, "I know, Father. I'll go over now." After he finished speaking, he walked out. However, his face was getting darker and darker. He initially thought that after the failed attempt to wash away the bad luck and the separation of their family, his father would completely hate Chungrui. Now, it seemed things weren't too simple. Now that Chengrui's ability was revealed, his father clearly intended to reconcile. It seemed that he had to be more careful of Chungrui in the future. Father Jiyu did not care about his feelings. He was only thinking about how to restore the Jiyu family's past glory. As long as anyone was helpful to him, he would make use of them. On the other hand, Jiyu Changye walked to Jiyu Chengrui's house. He paused for a moment before he walked over and knocked on the door. Hearing the dogs barking, Jiyu Chungrui, who had come out to welcome their guest, was stunned when he saw him. "Changye, what a rare guest." After saying that, he waved at Zhuang and brought him into the house. When Jiyu Genji entered, he saw the patriarch and village chief sitting in front of the dining table, drinking tea and peeling peanuts. He was startled for a moment before addressing them, "Uncle, Grandpa village chief. Changye, you are here. Have a seat and try these 5-spice peanuts cooked by Miss Ju. It's really fragrant." The patriarch smiled and waved at him. After that, he even moved his chair to make room for him. "Thank you, Uncle." Jiyu Changye thanked him as he took a stool and sat down. "Changye, drink some water." Jiyu Chungrui handed him a cup of chrysanthemum tea. "This is a chrysanthemum." Jiyu Changye took the teacup and asked in surprise when he saw a small chrysanthemum blooming in the water. "Yes, wild chrysanthemums can dispel cold, clear heat, cleanse the liver, improve eyesight, and have detoxification and anti-inflammatory properties. It works exceptionally well in the case of dry mouth, heatiness, dry eyes, limb pain, and numbness caused by wind, cold, and moisture. Therefore, drinking a cup or two of them occasionally is good for your body. Ji-yu Chung-rui before sitting back down. I didn't think you would really learn some real skills from Dr. Sunday. It's easy to be influenced by what you see and hear all day, so I can't help but remember some of it. But fortunately, I was paying attention back then and can have a skill of my own to make a living. Ji-yu Chung-rui replied. I don't think it's just to make a living. Your skills are equal to the doctors in town. The patriarch said with a smile. Chapter 71. Everyone changes. Not only that, didn't the 13th son of our Chen family get rejected by the doctor in town? Chung-rui still saved him in the end. The village chief said. 2 elders, please stop with the praising. Let's see how it goes in the future. Ji-yu Chung-rui said with a smile. Yes, we look forward to it. The patriarch agreed. He then looked at Ji-yu Chung-ye and asked, by the way, Chung-ye, why did you come here today? Ji-yu Chung-ye looked at Ji-yu Chung-rui hesitantly, but he could not say the words of apology he had prepared. Is it because of the bean sprout? The village chief asked. Yes and no, there are other things. Then you guys can chat. It's getting late, and we should go back. The patriarch looked at his stammering appearance and knew that it was something hard to say before them. He grabbed a handful of peanuts and immediately stood up. Right, you young people can chat. We'll be going back now. The village chief stood up and agreed. Seeing this, Ji-yu Chung-rui did not ask them to stay. After sending them to the gate, he turned around and returned to the house. After he sat down, he looked at Ji-yu Chung-ye, who was drinking his tea, and said, Chung-ye, there's no one else here. If there's anything you need, just say it. Ji-yu Chung-ye put down his cup and stood up. He bowed deeply and said, I'm here today to represent my mother and second aunt and apologize to you for what happened this morning. Seeing this, Ji-yu Chung-rui was shocked. At the same time, he admired Chung-ye for his personality. Chung-ye was able to be flexible with his standing. Based on this, he had to be more careful with him in the future. Chung-ye, please have a seat. To be honest, I'm really disappointed in mother and second aunt's actions. No matter what, I'm still my father's son, but they treat me less than an outsider. Don't you think that their ruckus has forced me against the rest of the village? I have no choice but to tell them how to produce bean sprouts. Ji-yu Chung-ye's expression froze on his face because he could not refute what he had said. If it were him, he would not even let him in. Yes, I also know that they have indeed gone too far, so I hope you can forgive them on behalf of father. I can't say that I've forgiven them. I just hope that they'll remember this in the future. I won't tolerate this forever. Ji-yu Chung-rui's face turned cold. If there's a next time, I won't let it go so easily. Don't tell me you want to. What if this happens to you? Chung-ye, do you still remember what kind of life we had at home? Do you still remember the circumstances under which we separated? If it were you, what would you do? Ji-yu Chung-ye clenched his fists and mumbled, You've changed a lot. At a certain point, people will change. Didn't father change? Has your mother not changed? Even Chung-shi isn't as lively as before, and has become a hard-working and bitter person. Ji-yu Chung-ye looked at him deeply after hearing that. He was shocked when he saw the tenacity, confidence, and faint deterrence in his eyes. At the same time, he quickly understood that Chung-rui had grown up quickly into a man with a truly strong heart. He was no longer the pitiful, helpless wretch, nor was he the person they could bully whenever they wanted. When he thought of this, he panicked slightly. It seemed that his third brother was going to break away from their control completely. Chapter 72. Recipe. In exchange for roast chicken. After a few polite words, Ji-yu Chung-ye left. Ji-yu Chung-rui sent him to the door and said, If you want to learn how to grow bean sprouts, let Chung-shi do it. It's straightforward. See you. Ji-yu Chung-ye was stunned for a moment before he nodded and turned around to leave. After Ji-yu Chung-rui sent him off, he went to the kitchen and started to work with Ju-ying. On the other hand, Ji-yu Chung-ye returned home and saw that the lights in his room were still on. He paused for a moment, turned around, pushed the door open, and walked in. Seeing Father Ji-yu sitting before the candlelight reading a book, he remembered what Ji-yu Chung-rue had said before and sized him up thoughtfully. Ignoring his other aspects, even just his appearance, had changed. His father had aged more than 10 years, and his face had become much thinner. After sensing his gaze, Father Ji-yu raised his head and saw him staring at him for a while. He couldn't help but ask, "What are you looking at?" "It's nothing. I just found that father's sideburns are full of white hair," Ji-yu Chung-ye said as he sat down. "I'm old. No matter what, I'm already in my 40s. Since I've stopped taking all sorts of supplements, it's normal that I'll look my age." "How did your discussion go?" Father Ji-yu asked. Ji-yu Chung-ye shook his head and briefly told him about their conversation. "Father, he has completely changed." After hearing this, Father Ji-yu pondered for a moment. He looked up at the window with empty eyes and said, "He's right. We've all changed. It's just that some of us have become stronger, some of us have become weaker, and most of us are still living in dreams." Ji-yu Chung-ye looked at him in shock after hearing that. All kinds of emotions surged through him, making him feel like crying. Especially when he thought about working in the workshop, suffering from pain he had never experienced. His back would always be sore, but in order to survive, he had to grit his teeth and persist. "Sleep early and take it slow. You'll find your way out." After Father Ji-yu sensed that Chung-ye was not in a good mood, he patted him on the shoulder, got up, and walked out. After leaving the house, Father Ji-yu turned around and looked for Ji-yu Chung-shi. Father Ji-yu informed him that he would learn to grow bean sprouts the next day. Then, he told second Uncle Ji-yu that he was going to the main hall to chat with their mother. As for what they talked about, no one knew. The next day, Mrs. Chiao personally watched as Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow worked, so they couldn't slack off. After Ji-yu Chung-rue delivered the goods to Hongyun restaurant and received his pay, he found manager Liu and determined the amount of tofu skin and dried yuba needed. He told him that they were going to spread the recipe for growing bean sprouts. "Manager Liu, I estimate that in less than 10 days, there will definitely be a lot of people coming to the town to sell bean sprouts. I hope you can make preparations early. It doesn't matter since our bean sprout cooking recipe has been launched." Manager Liu hesitated and continued, "Since you plan to spread the method of growing bean sprouts, I wonder if you could let me know what you think of me distributing the cooking recipe to other branches. As for the price, you can decide." "Of course I can. As for the price, I heard that your restaurant's roast chicken is the best. Why don't you give one to me?" Manager Liu was stunned for a moment before he laughed out loud. "No matter what, I should at least give you 2. How about tomorrow? I'll save 2 for you tomorrow. Then it's settled." Ji-yu Chung-rue nodded and told him seriously about the things to take note of when growing bean sprouts. "When you start growing your bean sprouts here, just let me know, and I will stop providing you with any more bean sprouts." After exchanging a few more polite words, he turned to leave Hongyun restaurant. Then, he bought some mustard, sweet noodle sauce, and streaky pork before going home. When Ji-yu Chung-rue left town, the patriarch brought a bunch of people carrying mud bricks and wood over. Zhu Ying didn't expect Tian Jiawang to buy 6 huge wooden pillars over. Although they were rough and thin, they were more than enough to build a donkey shed. Chapter 73. A question. Zhu Ying greeted the crowd. After choosing the spot for the shed, she left them to their things and returned to the front yard. After a short while, the women who wanted to learn to grow bean sprouts came over one after another. After everyone had arrived, Zhu Ying started her lesson. She told them the whole process of growing bean sprouts and the things to pay attention to. In the end, she even took them to the kitchen for a visit. The whole process took less than 15 minutes, and the women were in disbelief. "If I knew it was so simple, I wouldn't have come to learn," someone said regretfully. "I've just thrown in 100 clay bricks for nothing. No one forced you to come." Mrs. Bai turned her head and scolded the person. "Besides, everyone knows how to cook, but the same dish will taste different when cooked by different people. If you want to sell your food for money, you have to learn how to cook, don't you?" Indeed, no matter how easy it is to grow bean sprouts, we've lived half our lives without anyone discovering it. Sixth Aunt Ji-yu agreed. "I think it's better to go home early and try to grow bean sprouts." Everyone immediately shut up when they heard that. Those who confirmed that they had remembered everything immediately went home to work. Those who weren't confident asked Ju-ying a few more questions and only left after they remembered everything. When most of them had left, Ji-yu Chengshi walked in with a half-carried basket of firewood and said, "Third sister-in-law, Uncle said that Cheng-rui asked me to come and learn how to grow bean sprouts. Is that true?" "Of course, it's true. Follow me." Ju-ying brought him to the kitchen and taught him about it. Just as she finished, Ji-yu Cheng-rui walked in with some things. He looked at Ji-yu Chengshi and said, "Chengshi, you are here. Help your sister-in-law cook, and let's have lunch here." He handed 2 pounds of streaky pork and their sauces to Ju-ying as he said that. Ji-yu Chengxi's eyes lit up when he saw the food. "Third sister-in-law, are you planning to eat jajangmyeon for lunch?" "Yeah, jajangmyeon is simple to cook, and everyone loves it." "Sure, I'll help you start the fire. Then you guys go ahead, I'm going to the back," Ji-yu Chengshi said as he led the donkey cart to the backyard. Meanwhile, Ju-ying and Ji-yu Chengshi cooked in the kitchen. When they were almost done, Ju-ying asked, "Have you been eating well at home recently?" "Still the same, but I occasionally find some wild game on the mountain to eat. Plus, you guys give me some snacks sometimes, so it's okay." "I see. Growing bean sprouts is an opportunity, so you better seize it." Ji-yu Chengshi paused before he smiled and nodded. "Thank you, third sister-in-law. I understand." In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Not only had the patriarch helped to build a spacious donkey shed, but he had also helped to build a chicken pen. When they were finally done, Ju-ying brought 2 pounds of tofu for each of them to express her gratitude. Following that, the village was quite harmonious. On the 7th day, Sister Tian was the first to grow her batch of bean sprouts. Following that, everyone succeeded one after another, and there were more people selling bean sprouts everywhere. Therefore, in less than 2 days, many people suffered a blow due to the oversupply. In the end, Father Ji-yu and second Uncle Ji-yu bought over their bean sprouts at the price of 2 coppers and then sold them to the neighboring county by boat. Their business was going well. However, Tian Jiawang didn't sell his bean sprouts to them. Instead, he pushed his cart to town and the villages to sell them, having quite a good business. That afternoon, Ju-ying collected the dried yuba when Tian Jiawang passed by. He saw and greeted her. "You sure are busy." "That's right. Brother Tian, you've sold them out so quickly?" Ju-ying turned her head and asked. "I supplied some to a small tavern, so it was a quick day." Tian Jiawang paused for a moment and pushed his cart into her garden. "Sister, do you still make the braised dried tofu you made before?" Chapter 74. Jealous Why? Ju-ying was stunned and asked, "Brother Tian, do you want to buy them?" "Yes, I'm out every day anyway, and it's too bland for me just to sell bean sprouts, so I wanted to sell them together. By the way, if you have extra tofu, you can also share a plate with me to try to sell it." Ju-ying replied, "If that's the case, I'll give you 10 pounds of tofu and 5 pounds of dried tofu to try. If it sells well, we'll increase the quantity." "Thank you so much, sister." Tian Jiawang nodded and asked, "I wonder about the price." "We'll see how it goes tomorrow. Don't worry, I won't cheat you." "All right, I'll leave you to your work," Tian Jiawang said as he pushed the cart and walked out. After Ju-ying finished her work, she quickly picked up 10 pounds of soybeans and soaked them. After that, she used a pressure cooker to make a pot of beef soup. She planned to eat them with noodles when Ji-yu Cheng-rui returned. What she didn't expect was to wait until midnight. She had fallen asleep on the bed until Zhuang's cries woke her up. After suddenly waking up, she was confused for a moment before she came to her senses. She stood and walked out. Seeing it was Ji-yu Cheng-rui, she heaved a sigh of relief and asked, "Why did you come back so late today?" "I was in the neighboring village. I met a pregnant woman who was having a difficult labor, so I came back late." Ji-yu Cheng-rui strode in after explaining. "You delivered a baby?" Ju-ying asked with a worried look. This wasn't the modern world. If he, as a man, delivered a baby, his reputation might be ruined. "No, I just prescribed some medicine to induce labor and guided the midwife to give birth." Ji-yu Cheng-rui pinched her nose and said, "Don't worry, I know what the situation here is like. I won't help deliver a baby unless I have no other choice. Ju Ying was relieved and said, "That's good. Go wash your hands first. I'll go make some noodles and we'll have ramen tonight. Give me 2 more pieces of meat, I'm really hungry today." Jiyu Chungrui quickly said. "All right." Ju Ying replied and went directly to the kitchen. She stoked the fireplace and closed it up. Then, she went into her interspace and cooked 2 big bowls of ramen. She picked out the beef and put it into 1 big bowl, then brought the bowls out. After a warm meal, Jiyu Chungrui took a money bag from his medicine box and handed it to her. "By the way, this is the silver we earned today, a total of 3 taels and 2 coins. The 2 taels of silver were given by 13th uncle when I did a follow-up examination. You didn't ask for money back then, right?" "Yes, I didn't. The medicine that came later was also something they bought from town. They felt embarrassed for me treating him for free, so they gave me 2 taels of silver. I saw they were sincere in giving it to me, so I accepted it." Ju Ying nodded and left him 2 copper coins, putting the rest into her interspace. "Let's sleep in your interspace tonight. I need to make a box of acne cream with aloe vera for a patient." Jiyu Chungrui said. "Female?" "Yes, it's a little girl. Make me a box of moisturizer then, but I have to feed Zhuang first." After Ju Ying finished speaking sourly, she put the rest of the bones into the bowl. She scooped a big bowl of hot soup and threw 2 black steamed buns into it, giving them to Zhuang. After that, the couple took the dirty bowls into the interspace and continued their business. The following day, when the 2 came out early to grind soybeans, Ju Ying remembered that she had promised to provide some tofu and dried tofu for Tian Jiawang. She hurriedly told Jiyu Chungrui about this. Jiyu Chungrui hesitated momentarily and said, "Just do as you see fit, but don't tire yourself out." Chapter 75. Taking orders. Yes, I know. Ju Ying promised, and she started to get busy. However, Ju Ying didn't expect that before noon, Tian Jiawang came with a cart and asked, "Sister, do you still have any more dried tofu and tofu? Especially the dried tofu. I delivered all the ones you gave me to the tavern, and I don't have any more to sell." Ju Ying replied, "I really don't have any more, you can only wait until tomorrow." "Then can I order 1 huge plate of tofu and 50 pounds of dried tofu for tomorrow?" "So many?" Ju Ying asked in surprise. Then, she thought of the various things stored in her interspace and asked, "Brother Tian, what is the size of the tavern you are talking about?" "It's a small tavern on the dock, specially opened for the hard laborious, so they can't afford anything expensive. This dried tofu is a delicious side dish with a little mix, so the boss wants to order more." "Okay," Ju Ying said. "I'll give you a new dish tomorrow to try selling it at the tavern. See if the others want it." "What dish?" "It's a secret for now." "All right, I'll come over tomorrow morning." Tian Jiawang turned around and left. After he left, Ju Ying soaked another 20 pounds of soybeans and prepared a set of pig heads and pig intestines. After cleaning them up quickly, she put them into her interspace to stew. In the evening, she went into her interspace on time and took the pork out of the stew, completing her braised pork intestine dish. At night, Jiyu Chengru's eyes lit up when he saw the braised pork intestine. "Babe, I thought you never ate intestines. Why did you make these braised pork intestines today?" "Because you like to eat it. I've made it just in time to satisfy your craving," Ju Ying said as she told him about her plan to sell the intestines while serving him some rice. "It's good, but you'll be too tired." "It's nothing. I have nothing to do anyway. You can go out and chat around. It's not good to be cooped up at home all the time, right? Let's talk about it after the new year. Everyone is busy growing bean sprouts, who has the time to chat?" "That's true. There are fewer people out and about in the village now." Jiyu Chungrui saw that she was insistent and did not try to persuade her anymore, so he decided not to make house visits for his patient again. He would wait for his patients to come to him and stay at home to help her with her business if there weren't any. Unexpectedly, Jiyu Chungrui again received a large order from manager Liu the next day. He asked the couple to provide them with as many dried yuba as possible, and they would take them all. Therefore, after returning home, Jiyu Chungrui stayed at home. He helped Ju Ying dry the yuba, filling up the kitchen, living room, and courtyard. In the afternoon, Tian Jiawang ordered a serving of braised pork intestines. Seeing this, Ju Ying felt it was impossible to stew them in her interspace. The two simply used the mud bricks left from the donkey shed to make 2 small stoves in the kitchen, bought 2 big pots, and ordered a few tofu molds. After that, she hired Da Hua to help keep the kitchen fire going at the price of 100 coppers a month with lunch provided. She even told others that she would be buying more soybeans and firewood. It wasn't until 5 days later that the two of them started to get busy openly. Elder Qiao had just returned from purchasing the Jiyu family's business on this day. When he heard that the restaurant's business had taken a dive, he immediately looked for the manager of Dongxing Restaurant, Wang Quan. He asked, "Mr. Wang, I heard that the restaurant's business hasn't been good recently. What's going on?" "Sir, there are 2 main reasons. Over the past month, Hongyun Restaurant has been releasing new dishes one after another, snatching away many of our high-end customers. There's also a small tavern on the dock that has introduced a lot of new dishes. More than half of the customers in the middle and lower end have left too, so," Wang Quan replied in a trembling voice. Chapter 76. A young girl in love. Elder Qiao stood up angrily and threw the teacup at him. "You useless bastard. We can't touch Hongyun Restaurant because they have a strong backing, but can't you deal with that small tavern? What are you doing?" Wang Quan was so scared that he trembled and wanted to hide but didn't dare to. Fortunately, the teacup fell short of his feet. After that, he took 2 steps back and knelt down. "Master, please calm down. The people in the tavern aren't the problem. It's the person who supplied them that ruined our business, so I've been investigating that person for the past 2 days." "Oh, did you find out?" Elder Qiao finally heaved a sigh of relief. "I did, but they're also supplying Hongyun Restaurant, so, it seems that they're quite capable. Get up and tell me in detail." "Yes." After Wang Quan got up, he silently wiped his sweat. Then, he talked about Ju Ying and her husband's business and mentioned that Father Jiyu and second Uncle Jiyu were reselling bean sprouts in the neighboring county. "What? Have the Jiyu brothers found a job? What are you guys doing?" Elder Qiao slammed his fist on the table and roared. I found it when I was investigating the couple. It hasn't been dealt with yet." "How long have they been doing this?" "About half a month. Qiao Mu, come in." Hearing this, Elder Qiao turned his head and shouted outside. The Qiao estate's housekeeper, Qiao Mu, standing guard outside the door, felt his heart skip a beat when he heard Elder Qiao's furious roar. However, he still quickly walked in and greeted him. "Master, do you have any orders?" "Orders? How would I dare to order you? You're so busy that you've forgotten the most important thing I tasked you with, right?" I don't dare. Alright, let me ask you. Do you know that the Jiyu brothers have found a job?" Qiao Mu was at a loss when he heard this, and his heart skipped a beat. He thought that he was done for this time due to his negligence. Then, he bowed and said, "Please forgive me, Master. I have been checking the autumn accounts recently, so I didn't notice what happened to the Jiyu brothers. But, of course, it was my negligence." "You're making excuses. I think you just don't care." Yes, your humble servant, stop it. Ask Mr. Wang to tell you about the Jiyu brothers and quickly settle this matter." Elder Qiao said to Wang Quan at this point, "By the way, send someone to give me a taste of the new dishes at Hongyun Restaurant and that small tavern. You should also devise a new recipe as soon as possible and try to turn the situation around." "Yes, Master. I'll do it now." Wang Quan turned around and left after he finished speaking. When Qiao Mu saw this, he bowed to Elder Qiao and withdrew. Then, he found Wang Quan to understand the Jiyu brothers' matter. He turned around, called 2 people over and instructed them on something. At the same time, Ju Ying and her husband were busy making yuba. Then, suddenly, they heard Zhuang's barking. Jiyu Chungrui immediately stopped what he was doing and walked out. Seeing someone with a servant standing at the door, shocked by Zhuang, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he walked out and said to the veiled girl, "Miss Liu, you've used up the ointment." Not yet. Dr. Gu, aren't you going to invite me in for a seat? Miss Liu bowed and said. At the same time, she looked at him with a pair of wondering eyes, shyly and timidly, like a young girl in love. Gu Chengruo's scalp went numb, so he directly refused. Miss Liu, it's a bit inconvenient inside. If you have anything to say, you can say it here. Chapter 77A Warning Dr. Gu. Miss Liu looked at him with a sad expression and tears in her eyes. Gu Chengruo did not give her another chance to show her charm and rejected her again. Since Miss Liu I sent here for a consultation, please leave. After that, he turned around and went home. Seeing this, Miss Liu wanted to stop him, but Zhuang once again bared his teeth and barked at her. Seeing this, the maidservant at the side said, "Young miss, in this servant's opinion, we should leave. We can send Dr. Gu for a follow-up examination when the ointment is gone. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if the villagers recognized us." Miss Liu looked around and saw many children and women staring at them curiously. Then, she looked at Zhuang, who was still trying to rush at her, and a malicious look flashed in her eyes. She looked like a completely different person from her weakling self just now. But in the end, she nodded, turned around, and left in her carriage. After they left the village, Miss Liu looked at the maidservant and said, "Kui go back and find someone to poison that vicious dog of theirs to death." "Yes, miss." Kui nodded. She was obviously used to this. After that, she hesitated before saying, "Young miss, how should we deal with that lady Gu? She is the wife of Dr. Gu. Furthermore, she is the daughter of the imperial physician Ju. I'm afraid she is not easy to deal with." "What's there to be afraid of? Hasn't my father always been suppressing the Gu family? When the time is right, he'll give the Gu family a way out. By then, there'll be plenty of people who can help me." "I understand. Miss, as expected of your smarts." After Kui finished speaking, she obediently poured Miss Liu a glass of water. When they arrived in town, they took a detour and entered the back door of the Qiao family's residence. Gu Chengruo did not know about Miss Liu's scheme, but he would not take it to heart even if he did. He did not want to cause trouble all this time because they just wanted to live a simple and warm life. However, he would not let it be if trouble came knocking on his door. Therefore, when he returned to the kitchen, he smiled at Zhu Ying, who was still busy. Then, he turned around to get busy as well. 2 days later, Tian Jiawang came to pick up the goods. After that, he pulled Gu Chengruo aside and said, "Brother Gu, you guys should be more careful these days." "Brother Tian, did you hear something?" Gu Chengruo paused, turned his head and asked. "I can't say for sure, but someone asked for the recipe for the braised intestines, and I also saw strangers wandering around the village these 2 days. I can't guarantee anything, but I just feel uneasy." "Who is it? When did he ask you for the recipe for the braised intestines?" "When I started delivering the braised pork intestines," the tavern owner asked. "But after I said it was troublesome, he didn't ask again. Yesterday, I heard from the tavern owner that someone had been asking about the recipe for the past 2 days, and they've been going there to buy the pork intestines for the past 2 days. Every time they go, they'll buy everything." "I understand. Thank you for telling me this, Brother Tian. You should take care of yourself too." "I will. Sorry to bother you." Tian Jiawang said his goodbyes and pushed the small cart away. Gu Chengruo stood in place and pondered for a moment. Those interested in the recipe for braised intestines were most likely in the food business. It was more likely to be the restaurants in town. Of course, the possibility of it being Hongyun restaurant wasn't high, as they could have just looked for them directly. Who would it be? His heart stopped as he remembered that the Qiao family also had a restaurant. It seemed that he had to investigate it carefully, or he would be in a disadvantageous position. Afterwards, he returned to the kitchen to load the goods he had prepared for Hongyun restaurant and drove the donkey cart back to town. Chapter 78 Poisoning. Zhu Ying didn't know about this. After Gu Chengruo left, she continued to dry the yuba as usual. However, when she was moving the drying frame into the yard today, she found a giant dead rat at the foot of the wall. She was disgusted and put the yuba aside to find a shovel to throw it away. When she walked to the shed, she found a white bun on the ground. It was stuffed with meat. Seeing this, Ju Ying had a bad feeling in her heart. Because she never made pure meat buns, this must have been from someone else. Looking at the position, it was obvious that it was aimed at Zhuang. However, Zhuang was a dog. So who did he get in the way of that the person had to kill a dog? Was it a thief? However, she quickly recalled that dogs had a sharp nose and that Jiyu Chungrui had trained it to sniff common poison just in case. Hence, she directly kicked the steamed bun to Zhuang's hut and shouted, "Zhuang, sniff." Sleeping with his eyes closed, Zhuang woke up immediately when he heard her call. He looked at the bun before him and kicked it away without even sniffing. Then, he wagged his tail and squatted in front of her, looking like he was waiting for her to praise him. Seeing this, Ju Ying rubbed his head, then took a fresh chicken from her interspace and gave it to him. Then, she threw the steamed buns into a corner. Finally, she threw the rat away using a shovel and returned to work. After Jiyu Chungrui had delivered the goods and left Hongyun restaurant, he had not walked far when he met the tiger and leopard brothers, each holding a chicken leg and gnawing on it. After gnawing on it, they were still unsatisfied and even licked the oil off their hands. In his eyes, a light flashed. Then, he cracked his whip and drove the donkey cart over. "My two brothers, you're going home? It's been a long time since I've seen you." When the two of them heard his familiar voice, they immediately froze. Then, they turned their heads and laughed dryly. "Oh, it's Dr. Jiyu." When Jiyu Erjiang said this, he looked at the unfamiliar donkey cart and asked, "This cart is yours?" "Yeah, I just bought it a few days ago. Come on up if you are heading back too." "Ah, don't mind if we do." After Jiyu Erjiang finished speaking, he immediately laughed and climbed into the cart. Qian Zhuang pouted when he saw this but still followed. After they left the town, Jiyu Chungrui asked again, "My two brothers, what have you been busy with recently?" "Nothing much. I just stayed at home to recuperate for a few days and went to town to do my old profession. Today is the day I get paid, so I plan to return home to visit." "Your old profession?" It's to help the gambling den urge others to pay their debts." Jiyu Erjiang replied with an awkward smile. This was their main job, and they would do some sneaky things when they were free. But, of course, they would never say these things out loud. "I see. However, this job is not only dangerous, but it is also not a long-term solution. Have the two of you ever thought of finding a proper job? Dr. Jiyu, please don't mock us brothers. Who would want to hire us? That will depend on whether you have the determination to start over. Of course there is. No one wants to be chased around and berated every day." "That's good. Why don't you two follow me?" Jiyu Chungrui turned his head and asked. "Dr. Jiyu, please don't tease us. We can't help you with anything." "Why would I tease you guys? I'm serious." After hearing this, Jiyu Erjiang and Qian Zhuang looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. However, the two of them quickly shook their heads. They hadn't forgotten how he had quickly dealt with the two of them last time. If they worked under him, they would be tightly restrained by him. Chapter 79 Recruitment. When Jiyu Chungrui saw the resistance on their faces and the fear in their eyes, he quickly understood. They were afraid of him after he beat them up on the mountain. It seems that playing with them in the dark was worth it back then. "Why don't you even have the heart to correct yourself?" he said with a look of disdain. "Or do you want to live like this for the rest of your life? Not only would you not be able to experience the warmth of having a wife and child, when you are old, you won't even have anyone to serve you tea. After you die, you will be wrapped in a straw mat and buried in a pit. There wouldn't even be anyone to burn you money. Or maybe even worse, there won't even be a corpse of you to collect. You will leave yourself to be fed to the crows and dogs, unable to leave behind an intact corpse." At that moment, the faint cry of a crow could be heard, causing the two of them to shiver in fear. They didn't care if they had a wife or children or not, since they couldn't afford to raise them anyway. However, they couldn't stand it when they thought about how their corpses would be exposed in the wilderness and how they would end up being eaten. Then, The two of them looked at each other again and asked in unison, Dr. Gu, are you really willing to give us a job? Do you think I'm free to talk so much nonsense with you? Then, I wonder, what do you want us to do? Qian Zhuang asked. Jiu Jiang quickly followed and nodded. You guys should know that I'm also making tofu and dried yuba in addition to practicing medicine. Your work is also simple. When I deliver my goods daily, you will drive the donkey cart to help pick out and collect the soybeans. You should be able to do this, right? Yes, definitely. But the salary? 10 coppers a day. I'll increase it when you do a good job. Just tell me if you're doing it or not. Let's do it, we brothers will do it. Dr. Gu, aren't you afraid we'll drive the donkey cart out and leave? Jiu Jiang asked at this time. Unless you want to wander around for your entire life. Besides, you all have your own homes. Although they're a little run down, they're still worth more than a donkey. Don't worry, Dr. Gu, the two men promised immediately. We'll do our best. By the way, when do we start? Qian Zhuang asked again. In 5 days. In the next few days, help me keep an eye on the strangers who come to the village and see who they are. Also, find out who's asking about the recipe for braised pork intestine in town. Remember, just find out who it is. You don't have to take the risk. By the way, I'll pay you your salary for the next 5 days. There's such a good thing. Hearing this, Jiu Jiang was immediately happy. It was their strength to get information through the grapevine. Dr. Gu, do you mean that there have been strangers in the village these 2 days and have been looking for trouble with you? Qian Zhuang asked. I'm not sure, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Do you guys dare to do it? Let's do it, alright, I'll leave this matter to you. Take this money and get a pot of alcohol. Consider it my treat. Jiu Chungrui gave them some money after he finished speaking. Dr. Jiu, you're sure generous. Since you think so highly of us, we'll follow you. Qian Zhuang said as he took the money. When they arrived at the village, the three of them parted ways. However, Qian Zhuang met a stranger not far away. He immediately followed him quietly, thinking of the salary he had just received. After Jiu Chungrui returned home and tied up the donkey, Juying told him that someone had tried to poison their dog. Jiu Chengrui's expression changed. Where's the bun? He asked. Let me see. It's in this corner of the shed, Juying pointed out, pointing to the corner closest to the house. Jiu Chungrui immediately walked over. Chapter 80. Something happened. Seeing the remaining half of the bun, Jiu Chengrui's eyes immediately narrowed. Because he could tell that this kind of steamed bun with lots of ingredients was definitely not bought. The main issue was that there weren't many houses in the village that made this kind of bun, and it was impossible for them to use it to harm a dog. This meant it was most likely done by an outsider with decent family wealth. After that, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and scooped out a small part of the meat filling. When he returned, he said in a low voice, "Babe, I'm going to go into the interspace to do some tests to see what kind of poison was used. Look after the Da Hua. Follow me." After Ju Ying finished speaking, she returned to the living room and sent him into her interspace. When she came out, she had a small bottle of pepper spray in her hand. Then, she put it in her apron and went back to the kitchen to get busy. It wasn't until lunch was ready that Ju Ying let Da Hua eat first. She entered the west room and closed the door before entering the villa's second floor in her interspace. Seeing Jiu Chungrui still busy in the laboratory, Ju Ying walked over and asked, "Is the result not out yet? Your meal is ready. You guys eat first. Pick me up in half an hour," Jiu Chungrui said without turning his head. Seeing this, Ju Ying retreated. After keeping a portion of his food, she started lunch with Da Hua. After lunch, the sky turned dark, and a northwest wind blew. Obviously, the yuba couldn't be dried anymore. Ju Ying gave Da Hua a large bowl of tofu pudding and asked her to go home and rest. She brought food into her interspace. Jiu Chungrui had just finished his work, so she heated it in the microwave and passed it to him. After he finished eating, Ju Ying asked, "Rui, do you know what poison it is?" "It's arsenic." "It's not difficult to determine that. However, I use traditional medicine to make some disinfectants and anesthetics to replace iodophor and our modern anesthetics. Otherwise, the stock in your interspace wouldn't last long. Oh right, I've also made some high-concentrate knockout powder for self-defense. Just in case, I'll bring a bag with me when I go out in the future. Then who do you think is trying to harm Wang? I don't think it's an ordinary thief. Ju Ying asked thoughtfully. It's hard to say. Jiyu Chongrui shook his head. He hesitated but still told her what Tian Jiawang had told him. He then told her about how he had hired the tiger and leopard brothers. If it's really the Qiao family, we have to be careful. They're not merely after us for the recipe. I will. By the way, it's getting cloudy outside. Let's hurry up and clean up the house. After saying that, she took him out of her interspace. They didn't expect that it was already drizzling outside. The two immediately took the yuba from the yard into the house. After that, Jiyu Chongrui fed the donkey and returned. The two of them went into the kitchen and made the remaining soy milk into dried tofu and braised 2 sets of pig intestines. After the two finished their work, they took out a bag of coal from the interspace and added it to the stove. Then, they sealed the fireplace and returned to the living room. They cooked dinner in the interspace that night. After dinner, the two drank a pot of tea, and each took out a book to read. Of course, Jiyu Chongrui was reading medical books, while Ju Ying was reading cooking books. Just as the two added more fire and were about to enter the interspace, Zhuang suddenly barked out, followed by a knock on the door. The two listened to the heavy and urgent knocking on the door. After looking at each other, Ju Ying immediately put away the table lamp, books, tea set, and other things that should not appear in the room into her interspace. Jiyu Chongrui put on his coat and walked out while shouting, "Who is it? What's the matter?" "Chongrui, it's your second brother. Father and second uncle are seriously injured. Hurry and bring the medicine to the house. I have to go back first." Jiyu Chongye ran back in a hurry after he finished speaking. Chapter 81 Rescue. Jiyu Chongrui was stunned after hearing this. He cursed inwardly as he remembered the strangeness in the village these 2 days. Not only were they being watched, but they also discovered their old family was selling bean sprouts, and the person had taken action. Thinking of this, he immediately turned around and returned to the house. He said to Ju Ying, "Babe, something happened over there, and I have to go over. Do you want to come with me or wait at home? Let's go together. If I don't go, who knows what rumors they'll spread." Ju Ying also began to put on her clothes. After that, the couple hurriedly packed up the first aid kit, locked the door, and walked to their old house together in the drizzling rain. When they arrived, they found the old house was in a mess. Some were wailing, and some were carrying buckets of water back and forth. However, all that came out of the main house was blood. When Jiyu Chongye saw Jiyu Chongrui enter, he immediately brought him into the main house and said, "Chongrui, hurry up and look at father and second uncle. You have to save them." After entering the room, Jiyu Chongrui was shocked to see the two lying on a large bed. It was obvious that they had been soaked, and their faces were as pale as paper. Under the light, a faint grey hue was on their faces, making them look like dead people. Then, he quickly went over to listen to their heartbeats. After confirming that the two of them were still alive, he said to Jiyu Changye and Jiyu Changji, squatting at the side and starting a fire, "Big brother, don't start a fire. You and Changye should wash your hands and help me deal with their wounds." After he finished, he looked at Mrs. Chiao, who was sitting on the chair nervously and said, "Grandmother, take all the women out first. Remember to prepare a set of clean clothes and bedding for father and second uncle. Sai, I'll leave this place to you. If you need anything, just let me know." After Mrs. Chiao finished speaking, she sat up and then walked out with the help of Mrs. Huang. When Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow saw this, they did not want to go out but knew that now was not the time to make a fuss and followed quietly. After coming out, everyone saw Ju Ying's rosy and chubbier face. But they only glanced at her and didn't have the mood to find fault with her. Seeing this, Ju Ying naturally did not look for trouble. She turned around and pulled Jiyu Chengxi into the kitchen to help boil some water and stoke the fire. At the same time, Ju Ying asked, "Chengxi, do you know what happened?" How did they get so badly injured? I heard that the cargo ship encountered water bandits on the way. Not only had they robbed father's money, but they also sank the boat. So, not only did we lose all the money we earned recently, but I also heard that they had to pay for the medical expenses of the crew and reimburse the boat. More importantly, 2 people died. I'm afraid that Jiyu Chenx's face fell as he said this. Someone died? How many people are there on the ship? I heard that there are 8 of them. Besides Uncle and my father, there are 6 other crew members. Are they all from the clan? No, there are some from other villages. After Ju Ying heard this, she knew that the Jiyu family was in big trouble this time. It was likely that the family coffers would be emptied, and she had a headache just thinking about it. After that, she didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she asked about his recent lifestyle and was relieved to know that he was doing well. About 2 hours later, the light rain turned into light snow. Jiyu Chungrui and his 2 brothers had worked together to treat the wounds of the 2 elderly. After they were finally carried back to their rooms, Jiyu Chungrui said, "Remember not to start a fire in the house. Instead, use the method of rubbing the palms of your hands and feet to let them slowly warm up. For the next 7 days, they must eat light food, or else it will be troublesome if their wound festers. Father is already injured to this extent. You can't possibly still want to go back, right?" Jiyu Chungye turned his head and asked. Chapter 82 blocked. I won't, but I must go back and get more medicine now. Someone has to go to town tomorrow to buy some warm and nourishing herbs for me to make a medicinal meal, so I guess I have to trouble Chungye. Jiyu Chungrui said with a slight glance. Why don't I write a list? He said. Chungye, you can go to town to buy medicine tomorrow. Jiyu Chungye looked a little embarrassed when he heard that. Then, he quickly shook his head and said, you know medicine better, so you should go. Then I'll have to trouble you to help father rub his hands and feet. After Jiyu Chungrui finished speaking, he went to a second room to give Jiyu Chungji some instructions. Then, he brought Ju Ying home and said, Babe, I'm going to keep watch over there. If you're afraid, you can sleep in the interspace. All right. You should be careful too. Ju Ying took a pure wool military coat from her interspace and handed it to him. Jiyu Chungrui paused for a moment after receiving it. After hesitating, he took off the leather layer and put it on. Then, he returned to the west room to grab 2 doses of fever and anti-inflammatory medicine, turned around, and left. However, when Ju Ying thought of Father Gus' appearance, she couldn't stop worrying. She took the pepper spray and followed him out. She stood at the main entrance until she saw him turn into the door of their old residence. Then, she locked their door and went back to her bedroom to sleep. At his old house, Jiyu Chungrui had just boiled some medicine, and the 4 people who had sent Father Jiyu and second Uncle Jiyu back earlier returned. After Jiyu Chungrui learned they were injured, he immediately bandaged their wounds. Then, he fed the 2 elderly men medicine and stood guard. The 2 of them still had a fever in the middle of the night. In the end, he had to use an alcohol rub to suppress it. The following day, Jiyu Chungrui went home for breakfast and was about to drive the donkey cart to town to deliver the goods when Ju Ying followed him and said, Rui, I'll go with you to deliver the goods today. Jiyu Chungrui knew that she was afraid that he would be in danger. However, he also knew that it would be no help even if the 2 of them went together if he were really in trouble. Just as he was about to refuse, Ju Ying continued, if you don't let me go, then none of us should go. I'll have someone pass a message to Manager Liu later and have them come over to collect. You, Rui, just bring me along. Ju Ying held his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. You forgot that I have the interspace. If something really happens, we still have a way out. Jiyu Chungrui looked at how she was holding on to him tightly and knew he had to take her along. He said, I can bring you along, but you must take out 2 bags of knockout powder and prepare an air gun for me. All right. Ju Ying prepared the things according to his request and brought the pepper spray she had taken out before. Then, the 2 of them untied Zhuang and locked their house. They then rushed to town in the donkey cart. When they arrived at the restaurant, the 2 wanted to ask Manager Liu if he knew someone had asked about the braised dishes, but he was not there. The two had no choice but to turn around and buy the medicinal herbs for warming and nourishing purposes. Also, they sold 5 pounds of pureria powder to Dr. Luo at a price of 100 coppers per pound. Ju Ying used a basket as a cover after exiting the pharmacy and took out a pound of golden jujubes, a pound of longans, and a pound of goji berries. When they reached the main street, they were about to return when 5 people suddenly jumped out of the alley and blocked their way. Jiyu Chungrue, right? Our master would like to see you. Please come with us. After saying that, one of them went forward to lead the donkey. His attitude was arrogant, with a posture that didn't seem like he was inviting them but more like he was kidnapping them. The couple had to go even if they didn't want to, having no say in their choice. Chapter 83 Intent to kill. Seeing this, Jiyu Chungrue immediately stepped forward and pulled the reins. So, who is your master? Won't you know when you get there? Hurry up. Our master is waiting for you. The man looked at his empty hand and stared at Jiyu Chungrue with embarrassed anger. Why don't you dare to say your names? Why do I feel that you don't look like someone decent? Indeed, it doesn't look like an invitation to me and more like a kidnapping. Could it be that you are robbing us? Ju Ying deliberately shouted loudly when she saw this. If the Qiao family wanted to make trouble for them, she would ruin their reputation and see if they would still dare to be so arrogant in the future. Then, she thought of something and shouted, "Just who are you people? You're sure bold, robbing in broad daylight before so many people. Do you still have any respect for the law?" The moment she shouted, the people around her immediately hid far away. However, they did not leave, just stood not far away, watching from a distance. Seeing this, the 5 people were quite angry. The leader immediately said, impatiently, "Hurry up. Don't blame us for using force if you dare to dawdle." Still the same question, who is your master? If you don't even dare to say his name, we won't dare to go. What if you're a bandit? After saying that, someone on the side echoed, that's right. With your fiendish looks, who would dare to go with you if you don't make things clear? Are they really bandits? What? Look at the clothes they are wearing. Aren't those the clothes of the Qiao family's servants? The Qiao family is sure getting more and more arrogant. There's no helping it. Since the Jiyu family was pulled down, the Qiao family has been left unchecked. Isn't this what people often say? Among the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Be careful with what you say and not to get caught. When the man said this, he shook his head and looked at Jiyu Chungrue and his wife with sympathy. It seems that the young couple is doomed today. More than half of the crowd immediately dispersed. After all, the Qiao family was acting pompous recently. It would be troublesome if they targeted them. The voices of the people around them were not loud but not soft either. The 7 people who were surrounded in the middle naturally heard them. Seeing this, the 5 servants blocking the road knew they couldn't delay any longer. Therefore, the leader directly grabbed the donkey's reins and pulled them into an alley. Jiyu Chungrue knew he could not avoid this, so he nodded and turned to Ju Ying. Ju Ying understood and took out the things she had prepared before. She then quietly handed him a pack of knockout powder while she hid the pepper spray in her sleeve. Soon, the group stopped at the courtyard entrance, leaving one person to look after their things while the other 4 led the young couple in. When they arrived at the living room entrance, the leader went in to report before bringing them in. After the young couple entered, they saw a middle-aged man sitting in the middle, drinking tea and playing with prayer beads in his hand. The 2 of them looked at each other and stood still, waiting for him to speak. Elder Qiao, sitting opposite them, looked at the calm and composed couple and was very surprised. At the same time, he also had some respect for them. Because even he couldn't be so calm in such a situation. However, it was a pity that they were destined not to be friends, and he intended to get rid of them. After all, this young couple would definitely be his obstacles in the future. After that, he put down his teacup and sized up the 2 of them. When did the Jiyu family become so unruly, not even greeting when meeting someone else? Chapter 84 Bravery. Is this how you treat your guests? Jiyu Chungrue asked with a smile. After hearing this, Elder Qiao's eyes narrowed, and then he calmly said, "You're quite bold, aren't you? Aren't you afraid that he'll kill you? If you wanted our lives, I don't think we would be here. You're brave. As someone who has died once, what else can't he accept?" Hearing this, Elder Chow laughed. He knew he would not be able to gain any advantage with his words, so he said directly, "I heard that you have a braised recipe. If you hand it over, I can spare your lives and let you continue to sell tofu." "So you're the one who's been asking for the recipe for the braised intestines? May I know your name?" Jiyu Chungrui asked him back on purpose to test his temperament. "You don't know who I am? I've never seen you before. Ha ha ha. Interesting, you don't even recognize your enemy. It seems that your father really doesn't care about you." After Elder Chow said this, he stood up and said, "In that case, how about you come under my wing? I guarantee that you'll be able to live a good life. A person who doesn't dare to say his name is not worth my loyalty." When Elder Chow said this, he remembered that the recipe was Ju Ying's. Then, he flicked his sleeves and walked over to her with a smile. "Miss Ju, if you follow this stubborn and silly boy, you won't have a day where you can make a name for yourself. Why don't you come with me and be my fourth wife? With your craftsmanship and my connections, we can make huge profits from our cooperation. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. Since you know who we are, you should know that although our marriage was to wash away bad luck and married by imperial edict." Ju Ying turned her head and said with a blank expression. In other words, their marriage was registered with the emperor. Unless one party died, it would be valid for life. This was also the main reason why the Jiyu family, including Jiyu Chengru's original body, insisted on keeping her even if they hated her. When she looked at his oily, fat face, it was so disgusting that she had to look away after only one glance. When Elder Chow noticed the disdain in her eyes, he was furious, but he knew that she was telling the truth. His face darkened when he thought of this, and he said, "Since you don't know what's good for you, I won't waste my breath on you. As long as you hand over the recipe, I'll let you go. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. I've long heard that Elder Chow has become arrogant and tyrannical. It seems that's your true nature." Jiyu Chongrui laughed. "You're really bold," Elder Chow said through gritted teeth. "Men," he shouted. "Tie them up and interrogate them. Let them go only after they tell us the recipe." As soon as he finished speaking, the man who had brought them in immediately rushed towards Jiyu Chongrui. However, as soon as he got close, Jiyu Chongrui threw him over his shoulder and slammed him to the ground. He grabbed his leg and dislocated his ankle to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. At that time, the remaining 3 people also rushed in. After pausing for a moment, they all ran toward Jiyu Chongrui. Jiyu Chongrui was delighted when he saw this. As long as they didn't harass Ju Ying, he would go easy on them. He didn't hit them where it hurt, just avoided them and dislocated their arms and legs. In the blink of an eye, only one of the 3 people was still standing, but he didn't dare move forward. Seeing this, Elder Chow was also quite frightened. According to his investigation, Jiyu Chongrui should have been only a weak scholar. Elder Chow did not expect him to know martial arts and, more importantly, to be so good at fighting. Then, while his men were confronting Jiyu Chongrui, Elder Chow turned his eyes to Ju Ying, who was also watching the show. He quickly ran over and was about to grab Ju Ying's neck to threaten her. Chapter 85 Ruckus. Ju Ying smiled, turned, and took out her pepper spray, spraying it directly on his face. "Ah!" Elder Chow screamed. He covered his face and retreated a few steps, screaming non-stop. Seeing this, Jiyu Chongrui stepped forward and kicked the last person's chin. While he was in a daze, Jiyu Chongrui dislocated his arm and pushed him to the side. Then, he turned around and pulled Ju Ying out. When they rushed out of the house, they ran into the person guarding the entrance and a woman with a rolling pin. Jiyu Chongrui immediately rushed to the man. Ju Ying was afraid of getting injured, so she did not fight the woman head-on. She took her pepper spray and sprayed it at her 3 times. The woman could only cover her face and blindly wave the pin in her hand. Ju Ying saw this and went behind her with a smirk on her face. She kicked her butt, causing her to fall into the mud. Ji-yu Chung-rui was also done. He smiled and shook his head. "Babe, let's go." Ju Ying responded and immediately ran out. However, the two of them did not go home. Instead, they returned to Hongyun restaurant and informed Chef Ju of what had happened. They also explained that the goods might not be able to arrive on time tomorrow. After returning home, the two gave Tian Jiawang his goods. They took 2 old hens and the medicine they bought from the interspace and went to their old house after locking up. At the entrance, they found that it was full of people and could faintly hear the sound of women crying. Soon after, they saw 6th Aunt Ji-yu standing on a ladder from her house, watching the commotion. The young couple went up to her, and Ji-yu Chung-rui asked, "6th Aunt, what happened? Why are there so many people around?" When 6th Aunt heard his voice, she turned her head and looked over. She immediately came down the ladder when she saw the two of them. Then, she made a shushing gesture at them and pulled them into her house before saying, "Something happened last night. Did you guys know?" "I know. I was the one who bandaged and stitched up my father's and second uncle's wounds last night. But what's going on now? Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks, someone died. You know about the shipwreck, right?" "I know." Ju Ying looked at Ji-yu Chung-rui in surprise, as this was the first time she had heard of this. It seemed that their old family was going to go broke this time. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a little happy. She wouldn't have invented growing bean sprouts if they hadn't mistreated the original couple. They might have been living mediocrely, but they wouldn't be in such a big disaster. She would like to see if they could continue hiding their money this time. "The two families of the dead have come to demand an explanation," said 6th Aunt. "They are demanding 100 taels each. Your mother and 2nd Aunt are crying about how poor they are. However, I don't think they can avoid it this time. No matter what, they have to pay a large sum of money to solve it. And that boat, it's a good mahogany-made boat, and they have to pay at least 100 taels for that." 6th Aunt looked at the things they were carrying and said, "I think you two should go back and only come back after this matter is over. Otherwise, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow will definitely not let you off." The young couple looked at each other. They were really in a dilemma. If they were to hide like this, what would their reputation be in the future? But if they didn't leave, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow might demand something from them. In the end, the couple nodded simultaneously and decided to go over. Because no matter whether they hid or not, if Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow chose to cling to them, they would not be able to dodge it. It would be better to be on the higher ground so that they would have a good reputation. Thinking of this, Ji-yu Chung-rui asked, 6th Aunt, "Is the village chief and patriarch inside?" Chapter 86. Facing the problem they are. They went over as soon as the people over there came. Otherwise, they would have already started fighting instead of just crying and making a scene. 6th Aunt Ji-yu replied, "Thank you for telling us, but we still have to go." Ji-yu Chung-rui stood up and said, "Hey, you're still going there even after this? Aren't you afraid of getting entangled in it? We can't avoid it, be it a blessing or a disaster. Since it has already happened, we have to face it." Ji-yu Chung-rui bowed to her and picked up the hen, walking out with Ju Ying. 6th Aunt Ji-yu looked at their backs and shook her head. At the same time, she despised Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow even more. They were such a good young couple, but they were almost driven to death by them. "No, I have to go and take a look. I can't let them be bullied again." Thinking of this, she poured herself a glass of cold water and gulped it down. After that, she locked the door and hurriedly followed. After the young couple managed to squeeze in, they realized that the number of people in the house was no less than the number outside. They were all sitting there with small stools, as if they were planning to live here if they weren't reimbursed. Ji-yu Chung-shi carried a copper pot and shuttled between the crowds, pouring water for them and carefully serving them. The two looked at each other and then walked into the house. When the patriarch saw them coming in with their things, he stood up and said disapprovingly, "Why are you guys here? Aren't you supposed to be making tofu? I don't know if I can continue." Ji-yu Chung-rui laughed dryly. He did not hide the fact that they had been stopped and threatened to hand over the recipe for the braised intestine. "What, The Chow family has set their sights on you, Mrs. Chow said with anger. When Mrs. Liu and the others heard that, they gradually weakened their crying and perked up their ears to listen. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. Well, if I didn't know some fighting skills, maybe you would have to collect our bodies tomorrow. Jiyu Chongrue nodded. The patriarch's face turned extremely ugly after hearing this. This Chow family was getting increasingly excessive and was planning to continue opposing their clans for more generations. Then, he asked, so what do you plan to do? You can't keep hiding like this. They'll definitely come to you. Let's wait for my father and second uncle to wake up first. Jiyu Chongrue looked at Jiyu Chengji and Jiyu Chengye and asked, by the way, have father and second uncle woken up yet? No, the two men shook their heads in unison. After that, Jiyu Chengye continued, but their body temperatures have returned to normal, so they should wake up sooner or later. You two should have a seat, don't just stand. After saying that, he asked the women to squeeze out a bench for them. Thank you, Chengye. Jiyu Chongrue carried the things in his hands to the foot of the wall and then sat on the bench with Ju Ying. Uncle, Grandpa Village Chief, did the village investigate yesterday's incident? Do you know who did it? He asked. What do you think? The patriarch asked. I think it's the Chow family. If the robbers really did it, they wouldn't hurt the hostage. But we don't have any evidence, so you must be careful. I will. Jiyu Chongrue paused for a moment and nodded. They seemed to have also guessed that the Chow family had done it but just had no evidence. However, even if there were enough evidence, it would be useless. The Chow family must have someone to rely on since they dared to be so arrogant. The person backing them was not someone the Jiyu family could deal with in their current state. There seemed to be only two ways to solve the Chow family's problems. Either they secretly snuffed them out or they found a more powerful backer to oppress the Chow family completely. Otherwise, they would never have another peaceful day in their life. Chapter 87 Compensation 1. We can discuss the Chow family's matter later. Let's hurry up and think about the compensation. It's not good to let your doors be blocked like this anyway. The village chief urged. Indeed. Second aunt, tell us what we should do about this. After the patriarch finished speaking, he looked at Mrs. Chow. However, the way he looked at her was complicated, but most of it was filled with hatred. At that time, Ju Ying only remembered that the old madam's surname was Chow. Could it be that the enmity between the two clans was because of her? Then, she raised her head and looked at the old lady seriously. However, because she was too old, she really could not see anything other than the vicissitudes of life and embarrassment. After Mrs. Chow was called out, she sighed deeply. You all know my family's situation. Their request is too high, and we really can't afford it. Can you guys discuss and ask them to lower it slightly, at least come up with a compromise? Indeed, even if an employee in the capital were to get into an accident, it wouldn't cost 100 taels of silver. They are clearly extorting us. Mrs. Liu said as she wiped her tears. That's right. The imperial court only gives each family a death gratuity of 10 taels of silver as compensation. Mrs. Yarrow agreed. Then why don't you guys give us a number? We can sit down and discuss it. If you guys keep crying like this, you won't be able to solve the problem. The village chief said impatiently. Indeed, just say a number that you can agree on. At least we'll have a better idea of your lower limit, right? The patriarch agreed. After hearing this, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow looked at each other and said simultaneously, 10 taels each. Then you guys can talk among yourselves. The village chief immediately stood up to leave. Uncle Chen, don't lower yourself to their level, the patriarch quickly stopped him. After he finished, he looked at the two women angrily and scolded. What are you thinking? Even buying a strong laborer at the market can cost 12 to 15 taels. Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks. If you're still so insincere, then we won't bother anymore. But we've lost the goods, the ship is gone, and even my husband is still lying in bed. We really can't afford that much money, Mrs. Liu said with a face full of grievance. The patriarch's expression turned even more complicated when he heard this. That's right, there was still a ship. That ship belonged to the oil mill and was the public property of the clan. They had to reimburse that too. He was speechless and regretful. It seemed that he should not have been soft-hearted and lent it to them. However, the only thing he could do now was to reduce the compensation as much as possible. The village chief looked at his complex expression and also thought of the boat. For a moment, his head hurt even more. Mrs. Chow saw their faces getting ugly, and she was afraid they would leave them alone. At that time, their house was likely to be raided. She sighed and asked, "Village chief, how is compensation usually given when something like this happens?" "This mainly depends on the family's situation. We would naturally give more if the deceased had elderly or young children. If they are single, you can help buy a good coffin to bury them in and give some money for the burial to the clan." The village chief sighed. Today, the situation of these two families is not looking good. One of them is from another village. Not only did he have a lot of elderly people and children, but he was also the only child in the family. Although the other one is from our village and has a lot of family members, they are very poor, so they won't easily give in. After Mrs. Chow heard it, she gritted her teeth. It seemed that it was really not that easy to deal with this. The problem was that it would be difficult to find help in the future if they made a scene. After pondering for a moment, she replied, "Now, the best quality dry land is 8 taels of silver per acre. We will pay 50 taels of silver, equivalent to 5 acres of land to support the family, with the remaining 10 taels of silver as a burial fee." Chapter 88 Compensation 2. Mother, that's too much. When Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yarrow heard this, they retorted at the same time. 50 taels for one family, 2 families would be 100 taels, equivalent to 2 years' output of 100 acres of land. "You guys shut up." Mrs. Chow's sharp eyes glared. "Sister-in-law, if you've made up your mind, then we'll call the person to discuss it." The village chief said. "All right, go ahead." Mrs. Chow nodded. When the patriarch saw this, he immediately got up and went out. He called in 2 men who were in charge of the 2 families. After they sat down, the village chief said a few polite words before talking about the compensation. Of course, the other side couldn't agree at the beginning. However, under the tearful complaints of Mrs. Liu, Mrs. Yarrow, and the other women, it was finally set at 60 taels of silver for each family. After confirming, the patriarch said, "There's also the matter of the boat. Since it's not easy for your family, you can pay it off in 2 years. 30 taels a year, and the end of the year." "What? A broken boat costs 60 taels of silver?" Mrs. Yarrow exclaimed. "That's an excellent mahogany-made boat. You can calculate how much the wood alone costs." The patriarch said in an unpleasant tone. "Mother, let's just listen to the patriarch." Jiyu Chengji gave Mrs. Yarrow a look at this time. He had seen that boat, and it was a medium-sized boat that needed at least 4 people to row. 60 taels of silver weren't considered expensive for that. "Sob, I really can't continue living like this." When Mrs. Liu saw this, she knew the patriarch was not extorting them. This time, she cried for real. With such a large sum of money out, they would have to wait 10 years before they could recover if their family had no substantial business. When Mrs. Yarrow saw her crying, she also began to cry. Mrs. Huang and the other concubines also immediately began to cry. "All right, stop crying. Hurry up and get the silver." The patriarch slammed the table impatiently. "Come and read on our website Wuxia World site." Thanks, he had asked them to cry because he wanted to save them some money. But now that it had been decided, what was the point of crying? It was better to take out the silver and settle the matter quickly. 60 taels per family, hurry up and take it. Mrs. Chow said at this time. "Mother." Mrs. Liu turned her head and shouted with a face of unwillingness. The old thing also had silver in her hands. Why did she ask them to take theirs out? "Hurry up." Mrs. Chow shouted with a straight face. Mrs. Yarrow knew she couldn't avoid it and could only slowly walk out. Mrs. Liu looked at Jiyu Chengruei and said, "Chengruei, you know what's going on at home. You and your wife should at least contribute something, right?" Without waiting for Jiyu Chengruei to speak, The patriarch and Mrs. Chow shouted simultaneously, "Shut up." Of course, the reasons for the two people stopping her were different. The former was unhappy about Mrs. Liu's tone and stood up for the young couple. The latter was more concerned about their dignity. Previously, the husband and wife had left the family with nothing. If they were forced to pay up now, they would really lose their remaining dignity. Mrs. Liu was startled by their repeated attempts to stop her and could only obediently return to her room to get the silver. Fortunately, the two of them weren't stupid. The silver they took out was in small broken amounts, and they added in strings of copper coins. Mrs. Yarrow had even taken out the silver hairpin she had bought earlier, giving off the feeling that she was at the end of her rope. Regardless of whether the people believed it or not, the two families felt much better after the patriarch helped them increase the amount of silver they had received. As soon as they left, the people who were watching the show gradually left as well. The patriarch stood up and said, "Aunt, since we're done here, we'll be leaving now. Let me know in advance if you need anything in the future." "All right, I'll come to thank you when the two brothers wake up," Mrs. Chow said as she stood up and sent him and the village chief out. After they were sent off, Jiyu Chungrue went to see Father Jiyu and second uncle Jiyu. After ensuring their condition had stabilized, he asked Mrs. Liu to prepare some millet porridge and went home. "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.